and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. I don't know what this episode is going to be titled. Really, it could be anything, but if it's an incendiary title, then hooray. Alright, well, let's just get right into the news. First, update on the Salvadorian election. Surprise, surprise, Nayib Bukele won with 84.65% of the votes, with his closest opponent, Manuel Flores, getting 6.4% of the votes. It is incredibly lopsided, and it is pretty obvious that the election was very obviously rigged. I'm sorry, it's just a fact. The election is objectively rigged. I don't even have to look into any of the details, because it's just objectively rigged. Bukele wasn't even supposed to run for re-election. You're not allowed to do that. Rigged election. And if you want even more proof that the election is rigged, literally, immediately after the election results closed, Nayib Bukele announced that he had won the election bid and won 58 out of 60 seats, even though none of the results were counted yet. And the legislative elections have literally been shown to be possibly, they announced that there were some irregularities in the ballots. So, they're still working out the kinks on that regard, but the preliminary results, as I've seen them, is 71% to Nuevas Ideas, and the closest competitor being the Nationalist Republican Alliance. So, yeah, very obviously rigged election is very obviously rigged. Not much else to say on that. Next story. So, here's an interesting thing that happened. Ex-U.S. government informant gets life over Haiti president's murder. A former U.S. government informant has been sentenced to life for his role in the assassination of Haiti's former president, Jovenel Moise. The sentencing comes 2 months after Haitian-American Joseph Vincent, 58, pleaded guilty to taking part in the late president's assassination plot. Before his sentencing in a Miami court, he told the judge, "Please forgive me for what I did." President Moise was shot and killed in his home in Port-au-Prince in 2021. Vincent, who worked for the US DEA, is the fourth of 11 defendants to be sentenced to life in the Miami federal case for his supporting the role of the murder plot. So, the Haiti situation gets even more blatantly sus every day, because US government official literally directly involved with his murder. So, yeah, there's not much else for me to say on that one, but it is Black History Month, so I guess I had to include one element of Black history. A black leader of a foreign nation being murdered by the United States federal government. Because that has never happened in U.S. history ever. You couldn't tell, but I shifted my eyes 2 times. Anyways, next story is coming from the UK, and it is a very tragic news story. Very, very tragic indeed. Because the UK is going to be holding a by-election in a red district, i.e. a Labour district. A Labour MP died, so they're actually going to be holding a by-election in his constituency. And a red district in UK. We all know what this means. And yes, George Galloway has announced that he will be contending in the race. And yes, this area does have a sizable Arab and Muslim population. Who would have thought? So George Galloway is going to do the thing that he has been doing for basically his entire post-Labour career. Find a constituency that is very Muslim and is a Labour-held district, and then somehow, well, not somehow, but he's going to stoke racial and ethnic tensions in the area, and then basically use that to coattail ride into the parliament. Well, not all of them necessarily have to end with him in the parliament. The first time it's amazing how he fucking does this. It is amazing how he does this. So, these are the 3 times. He ran in another race. I think he ran in 2 other races, actually. But, these are the 3 races that are the most prevalent to tell the story. The first one was when he ran in a district that was heavily Arab and heavily Muslim, and he had a Jewish opponent. I think we all know where the story ends there. Basically, him tying her to Israel, him tying her to, like, oh, you really, like, basically his whole thing was like, do you really think that this woman can be a proper representative of your community? I don't think so. And then that works, and then he manages to get into Parliament. And then he runs in a different district. And this one is interesting, because this one is a different one, because he ran against a Muslim, and then he ran as, you really think this guy is sufficiently Muslim to represent your constituency? Please. I think I'm better representative of Muslims than he is. And somehow that worked. But his most recent one is, of course, the recent endeavor where he ran against Kim Liederbitter. But this one was different because he actually actively campaigned to her right on a lot of issues, particularly a lot of social issues. And I think he's going to continue doing that kind of stuff with this race. Like I think in his announcement video, he was like, oh, blah, blah, blah. This person is rather focusing on the, like, trans people than fighting for Palestine. And it's like, yeah, that's gonna... And people have been unequivocally just, like, spreading, like, yay, George Galloway, look at George Galloway entering this race. It's like, this guy is very transparently a grifter. But here's the biggest problem. There's a chance that he can win this race. Very sad. There is a slim chance that Galloway actually manages to win this race. And the reason is Starmer. Starmer is just objectively running terribly. And I saw a video, and it was of the Labour candidate in this district, and he was meeting with some constituents. Like, he went to a restaurant. And this is I'm pretty sure I could be telling on myself right now, but I'm pretty sure the candidate is Arab or Muslim. I'm pretty sure he is Arab. But the thing is, his constituency does not trust him. They don't like him because Keir Starmer is the head of the Labour Party, and Keir Starmer is actively supporting and aiding and abetting the genocide in Gaza, with Starmer literally being caught on record saying, I don't think Starmer said it, but I think someone told Starmer, like one of his aides told him, that you can actively avoid and ignore the Muslim vote. And it's just like, Starmer is literally just setting this guy up so that Galloway wins. That's literally what he's doing. Galloway is literally right smack dab, right in the perfect place. Like, the thing is, it's not even like really about Galloway. Galloway's just in the right place at the right time, unfortunately. And it sucks, but oh well, it is what it is. Speaking of things that don't have to be how it is, very interesting thing, the youth faction of the Alternative of Germany literally was caught saying that they want to send Jews to camps. I'm not kidding. I think it's called Die Spiegel, or Spiegel Politics. It's a German publication, but I found the article. I think it was in a populism updates thing or whatever. But anyways, literally, a reporter of theirs literally snuck in to a young AFD meeting and literally said that the, quote, solution with the Jews would be to assign them to an area where they can all go. Literally actively saying that they want to put them in ghettos. And the Twitter video I say before, where I say ban the AFD, yeah, like literally, ban the AFD. The AFD needs to be banned. The only shining hope is that maybe there's a spoiler effect with fucking, who's that girl? I forget her name, but she's like she was called the German Tulsi Gabbard. She was part of Die Linke, but she also like hates immigrants, so she left and formed her own party, which is basically like dang it, I forget the call. Strassrite. She basically formed a Strassrite party to basically siphon off their votes, so maybe there's a chance. But anyways, next story, coming to America, we have former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan announcing that he intends to run for the United States Senate. Now, this is actually kind of big for a couple of reasons. The biggest one being, I actually covered the story of when they tried to get Larry Hogan to run the last time, Because if you remember, in 2022, they actively tried to get Larry Hogan to run in the Senate race then against the incumbent Chris Van Hollen, and they told him, hey, you can run for the seat. But this is literally how the deal went. They literally told him that they are okay with him voting against every single bill they propose. That's how desperate the GOP was for a W in 2022. That they were literally like, look, dude, you can vote against literally everything that we push for. We just want that number to go up. They just want that moral victory. So they're literally doing that with this deal. That's what this deal is clearly supposed to do. They want that sort of situation again. But there's actually another interesting fact that is interesting about this deal, because this technically removes him from contention from the No Labels convention, which is a very odd choice because everybody's been saying that No Labels would split votes with Joe Biden. So it's like, wait, what's the plan here again? I'm confused. What's the plan here again? Or maybe it's 4D chess because they think Larry Hogan, as a Republican, would siphon more votes from them. But, whatever. I don't really think anybody who would be voting for Larry Hogan would be voting for, Trump necessarily. I mean, I guess technically there are people who voted for Larry Hogan and for Trump, which is ironic considering the two are very much ideologically opposed in a way. But at the very least, he's been paying himself. And there's one more thing that I should mention, because this is one thing that has been going around. And that is the fact that a lot of people have been trying to figure out what does this mean for the race. Because a lot of people are saying, particularly on left Twitter and Democrat Twitter, are trying to say that this race is still basically a done deal and Hogan has no chance. I 100% disagree. I think that Larry Hogan does have a chance. Do I think he's the most likely person to flip the Senate? Not necessarily. I don't think that Larry Hogan is 100% guaranteed to flip, but I think that he puts Maryland in the top races to flip. First polls, their only polls that have been released were Larry Hogan versus the top two Democratic contenders, David Trone and Angela Alsobrooks. And, not to be that guy, Alsobrooks was losing in the poll. Trone wasn't, but there's a lot of factors you could say. I don't remember when that poll was made, but I'm pretty sure that poll was made a long time ago. But you might say, why do I think he does have a chance? Because a lot of people have been, again, trying to point out the fact, he's a lot like Phil Bredinson, or he's a lot like this person. But that is very untrue. I don't believe any of those things are true, because there are a lot of factors that you need to look into. One of the biggest ones being that Hogan has shown that he can do things that no other Republican can. Hogan won 2 terms in a deep blue state as their governor. Now, a lot of people try to compare it to other people. But this candidate, Linda Lingle, she won 2 terms as the Republican Republican governor, and she ran for Senate, and it lost. But here's really where I think it's a little bit different. You see, Senate races are not necessarily governor's races, and we know that for a fact. The same time that Maryland was electing deep blue senators, they were also sending Larry Hogan to be the head of their state. And I understand the fact that there will be some interesting changes here and there, and that's why I'm a little bit concerned because of Hogan. Because Hogan has effectively distanced himself from the rest of the GOP so effectively that many in his states were literally turned off to the idea of voting for their own fucking party and instead of voting for Larry Hogan. And the thing is, I don't necessarily know if it's that far to be that, it's a little hard to explain because I'm a little all over the place in sort of my thinking on this, but one of the reasons why I think, because they keep comparing it to Hawaii, and I think Hawaii and Maryland are very different states. We all know that for a fact. Hawaii and Maryland are very different states. But one factor that I really think plays a huge part in this is the fact that in 2012, when the Senate race in Hawaii with the quote-unquote popular Republican governor, it was 43% white. That the state was 43% white. Meanwhile, Maryland's most recent census has their white population as 61%. That's a very big difference. And that is, again, one of the reasons why I think they were more comfortable with Larry Hogan than Ben Jealous. Simply put, white liberals, they're not necessarily the best allies, really. And the fact of the matter is, I think they might be, I think there's a chance that they could be really looking at Hogan. But then again, there's also the fact that post-Dobbs, maybe they're not willing to take the chance. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Speaking of things we no longer have to wait and see about, very ecstatic to share the news, Marianne Williamson has dropped out of the 2024 presidential race. And it only took her losing to literally nobody in order to do it. I'm not kidding. Nevada held a presidential primary that I forgot was going on, and she literally got third place to nobody. And to be fair, Haley had a worse blowout to nobody, but literally when you get third to nobody, it really is just dead at this point, really. As a person who has been critical of her run since the very beginning, in fact, technically before the beginning, as I was critical of the idea of even suggesting Marianne Williamson run for president in 2024 to be the progressive torchbearer, but nobody listened to me, and people only listened to me after it was way too late. And there are just two words that I have to say to Marianne Williamson. Fuck you. Legitimately, fuck you. And while I'm at it, fuck you, Kyle Kalinske. Fuck you, Crystal Ball. Fuck you, Vanguard. Fuck you, Carlos Cardona. Fuck literally every single person who took Marianne Williamson seriously as a candidate. And this ranges from everybody who was like, oh, well, I'll vote her for, like, I'll vote for like, just because, like, to people who were actively campaigning for her. Legitimately, fuck all of you. Anybody who took Marianne Williamson's campaign seriously, fuck you. You are the exact reason why the left has absolutely zero chance to do anything in 2024. Because all this time that you were hashtag Marianne Williamson, hashtag, well, yeah, maybe we can vote for her like a little bit, or like any of the single activism that you did for Marianne Williamson, whether it be from an innocuous message to pointing out very obvious, like, thing, like, literally, all this time could have been spent actively campaigning. We have so many fucking deep blue seats that are just not even remotely up for grabs anymore because we don't have any candidates to run in them. Because people were so fucking focused on Marianne Williamson 2024, and you all fucking blew it. We have to fucking tout out like perennial losers for even a slight chance of even increasing the squad. And now people are actively whining and bitching and moaning about Joe Biden when we could have solved that problem by giving people candidates to, at the very least, vote for down the ballot. But no, you instead wanted to focus on a vanity bid for a vapid fucking anti-vax whore. Man, you don't have to be that mean here. You don't have to call her a whore. Marianne Williamson is a whore. Marianne Williamson is a whore. Marianne Williamson is a whore. I genuinely do not care. I genuinely do not fucking care. I don't care if Marianne Williamson sees this video and then DMs me and says, man, those words were really mean. Those words were really mean. I'll call her that to her face. I do not give a fuck. Like, organizer memes is like, haha, well, funny, random, like, is like laughing and ho-ho, like they're doing it for the meme. No. I'm doing it out of absolute vitriol. Marianne Williamson was the fucking key that they show a little baby to get them to pay attention. That is what she was. And you all just fucking did it. And I'll even go so far. You know who else is to blame? Me. I'll admit it. I have blame for this too. Because I focused a lot of my attention on shitting on Marianne Williamson when I should have been like bringing up, like, every time Marianne Williamson should have been brought up, I should have just brought up the names of candidates that would have been viable. And granted, I did do that a lot. Whenever someone would bring up Marianne Williamson, I would try to say, focus our attentions to other things. I would try to bring up Hill Harper. I would try to bring up Barbara Lee. But I also spent a lot of time just shit-talking Marianne Williamson. Like, 2 seconds ago, I literally just started calling her a whore for no reason. Which, a person who sells themselves for money. That is technically what Marianne Williamson is. She's a politician, so yeah. Oh wait, politicians have to win office, don't they? Yeah. Now, here's the thing. I don't necessarily know if she dropped out before this or after this, but I think one of the things that might have been the killer for the race was the fact that a bunch of Arab Michigan candidates openly endorsed uncommitted on the ballot. Like, we're going to massively vote for uncommitted. And it's like, wow. You're seriously going to vote for unfucking committed over Marianne Williamson? Which I would have too. But she didn't do anything to get on the ballot in North Carolina, and then she flat out lied to a lot of you. Like, genuinely, her and her crew are just flat out liars, and anybody who took her campaign seriously ever don't deserve your support, do not deserve your attention, deserve to be ignored, deserve to be ostracized. Same thing with Force to Vote. You took Force to Vote seriously? Go away. I don't need you. You're gone. You're irrelevant. You'd rather do your fucking bullshit, like, fake things instead of actually focusing on real, actually important things. Go ahead, do that. But do that in a faraway land that's irrelevant from actual normal people. Anyways, I should just get off this subject because I know I'll just ramble about this forever. Because we have an actual very important thing to talk about. This is an actual important thing that I should actually be discussing. Again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to focus on Marianne Williamson, drama, and BS when I should be focusing on more important things. Like, this podcast topic is way more important than Marianne Williamson's fucking, wasteless bid. So let's move on to the main topic of this video. First thing I should say is, Happy Black History Month, everybody. If I was smart, I would have figured out a way to make all of the topics of this month be about Black history, which I unfortunately did not do. And it's very tragic. But it also happens because this coincided alongside the 300th episode, which will be released this month. Yes, if you haven't been paying attention, Podcast 300 is going to be released on February the 26th. It's going to be a pretty interesting episode. I think you'll like it. You might like it. You probably won't, but you might. And I guess while I'm promoting future podcasts, I should say this. The thing that I should have done for Black History Month, I do intend to do for a future month celebration. I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say for a month, my podcasts are going to be pretty gay, all things considered. But anyways, this episode is dedicated to a topic regarding Black Americans. I don't necessarily know what I'm going to title this episode or whatever, but it's going to deal with civil rights and segregation. It was suggested to me by a person because I said, hey, I want to have at least one episode of this month's, podcast be actually about something related to the Black community. So, any suggestions? And one person gave me a ton of suggestions, and 2 of which seemed somewhat related, so I decided to combine the 2 to talk about this. And here's the thing. A lot of you might be saying, well, segregation, yeah, that's a very weird thing. Wouldn't you rather dedicate a full main series video to talk about the history of segregation? Well, I'm not necessarily talking about the history of segregation. I'm talking about the segregation that's going on today. Now, before we get into that, let's just talk a little bit. What is racial segregation? Racial segregation is the separation of people into racial or other ethnic groups in daily life. And to Americans, when we hear the term segregation, we have a vivid image in our minds, usually involving seeing a history book or a movie thing that has a very drastic black and white picture of whites only or colored only drinking fountains. And there's a school. It was back in the day, they used to have schools that were only for white people or schools only for black people. What? Back in the day, black people had to sit in the back of the bus. They literally couldn't sit in the front of the bus unless there were literally no white passengers on the bus. And according to our history books, one day a man by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. and many other activists came in and boom, solved the problem. And now people of all different races and colors are now 100% equal. I mean, we elected a black man president, so I mean, everything must be good now, right? 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 Well, that's what we're taught. But most rational people understand that racism isn't gone. Like, I mean, we all understand that racism isn't gone, but most would think, oh, well, yeah, maybe individual racism is not necessarily gone. We still got some people who are, like, individually racist. But, I mean, institutional racism is pretty much gone, right? I mean, we don't have segregated schooling anymore, right? Well, not exactly. You see, the thing about the Civil Rights Act that we all know is that it targeted Southern segregation, but it ignored Northern segregation. Now, some of you might even go so far as to like, wait, what? Northern segregation? Yes. While the Northerners were wagging their fingers at Southerners for segregation, North was also pretty heavily segregated. The difference was the type of segregation. Like, when we think segregation, we think of all the explicit Southern segregation where it said, like, oh, this place is only for white people, or this place is only for black people. Like a store owner literally holding up a sign saying, no Negroes allowed in my store. That's not how it worked in the North. You see, the North, here's how it would work. Areas that were predominantly African American would be drawn to be undesirable neighborhoods. And those undesirable neighborhoods would conveniently not be given a lot of economic opportunity that are given to other neighborhoods. And coincidentally, that led to a socioeconomic divide between neighborhoods of different races to drastically change. All of a sudden, white neighborhoods were doing really, really well. Meanwhile, black and Latino neighborhoods, not so much. A process that we all know now as redlining, which was implemented by a Northern Democratic president, FDR. And things just objectively the fact is, the divide just started getting further and further and further, as these wounds would carry on to the next generation of people. One of the biggest ways that it was done was through schooling. Because how are schools paid for? By your local property taxes. So, coincidentally, if you were in a lower economic neighborhood, you had a lower economic school, which meant lower grades, more dropouts, and it was a slippery slope that would then lead people to commit crime, which would inevitably make these neighborhoods worse, which would inevitably make the schooling worse, and again, very coincidentally, these divides would very much be along racial lines. The really well-off schools would have a lot of white people. Meanwhile, the quote-unquote worst schools would be predominantly African-American and / or Latino. In fact, this is the thing. This isn't something that we're even just figuring out now. This is the thing. This has been going on for a long time, to the point where it was even mocked during the time period. Oh yeah, these Northern liberals, they think they're so high and mighty, but look at their own schooling. Malcolm X literally said that in an interview. Well, he didn't say exactly that, but he's like, I don't need to go to the South to see segregated schooling. I can just go right here in New York. And prominent left-wing activist Phil Oakes wrote a song that literally quotes this point blank multiple times in the song. Here are 2 lines from verse 3. And I love Puerto Ricans and Negroes as long as they don't move next door. And basically the entirety of verse 4 tackles this. The people of old Mississippi should all hang their heads in shame. Now I can't understand how their minds work. What's the matter? Don't they watch Les Crane? But if you ask me to bus my children, I hope the cops take down your name. So love me, love me, love me. I'm a liberal. Ignore the shitty singing, pay attention to the lyrics. They're literally calling out the fact that as much as the Northerners like to pretend they are so high and mighty in regards to this, they are no better, just better at hiding it. And since this isn't explicit segregation, which is explicitly what is tackled in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, nothing would be done about it. To the point where this form of segregation is still prominent, especially in the North. It's also prominent a lot in like cities and stuff, but especially in the North, with data showing that the most segregated schoolings in the United States is New York, with other heavily metro areas being near New York in the rankings. Literally, it's exactly the whole separate but equal, it's literally almost exactly beat for beat, like the separate but equal logic of yesteryear, where, again, Southern segregation is look, it's separate but equal, but then it's wait, it's literally not at all equal at all. Now, don't get me wrong, this doesn't immediately absolve the South, because they too would find ways to get back to their old habits. Because as they were desegregating schooling up to the 80s, and that's one thing that I always found very interesting, wait, really? Really? That's how long it took? Because think about it, it literally took till the 1980s to officially begin, not begin, but desegregation was still going on in the 80s. That's very weird. You think of segregation, I think of segregation as something that happened during when my grandmother was a child. My grandmother was in 3rd grade when JFK died, so she lived through segregation, at least for very early on in her lifespan. But my mother might have actually went through segregated schooling, and there's a chance that maybe this went on for a 3rd generation. I'll get to that when I get to that. But as desegregation was going on in the South, many white parents were just flat out pissed, and were just openly being racist regarding black students, saying that if black students would be brought into their schools, they would say stuff like, quote, my son shouldn't have to worry about being stabbed or robbed, and also, if they want to send these kids here, then we should get assistance to send our kids to better schools, insinuating that, again, African Americans going into schools will automatically make the school worse. Because that's the logic that was brought in. They're this is the weird thing. White people literally invent, the categories, and then the next generation is just too stupid to understand that they built this up. They made this whole thing up. Again, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They make it so that black areas are labeled as economically unviable and worse, which then self-fulfills the prophecy. Much in the same way how people created the Jewish all stereotypes and all problems about racial groups, they're invented by the majority group, and then in the next generation they just go oh, see, this is proof. The one I was going to use as an example to bring it together was the fact that Jewish stereotypes were invented by the majority Christian population, and then it's yeah, that's terrible. Side tangent, I think I explained it before, but the whole stereotype of Jews and being in the banking industry, that's because Jews were literally forced into the banking industry because no other job would hire them. So they invented that stereotype for Jewish people. And back to the affirmative action programs, one person sued to basically end desegregation in the South. And it did. So the schools begun to resegregate. Very much prevalent, again, in urban areas, because it's way more common to have an urban area just be like that. Rural areas are a bit weird. I don't understand. This could just be from my lived experiences, but rural areas are really fucking weird in regards to this. Because I've been to extremely rural areas, and literally, on one end, you'll have the fucking most racist redneck guy, and then at the end of the neighborhood, you'll have 3 Mexican immigrants living in a house together, and they just get about their day. I don't know how this is possible. But urban areas, I don't know why. I don't know why it's urban areas. I guess it's, again, because urban areas are seen as like I think it's just because they're bigger. Like it's easier to see racism in a small town than it is to see racism in a big town, I guess. And there is another way that they're trying to push, that like people, particularly Republicans, are trying to push to make schools even further segregated, that I don't even think this person even acknowledged. And that is private/charter schools. A private school, for those that don't know, is a school that receives little to no public funding, relying on the parents of the students to pay for the school directly, not via property taxes, so they are not bound by the exact rules as a public school, such as the rules about integration. And since you have to pay to get into the school, only the wealthiest people can get in, which typically means that people of color can't enter due to the racial wealth gap, because the poor education they receive leads to them having poor jobs. But again, self-fulfilling prophecy. They get a shitty education, and then it leads to them becoming the undesirables that they were drawn as initially. When you don't give people a chance, they can't show that they can improve. And the charter program is where taxpayer money is spent to send kids to private, like to have children have like a charter or like a voucher to go into a private school, which means that money would then be directly taken out of the public school budget in favor of sending kids to private school. And take a wild guess which schools would obviously be the most affected by funds being taken away. The GOP is, of course, very obsessed with private schools, and they consistently push for the expansion of the charter programs, which, with them also opposing things like affirmative actions, means that they are very clearly trying to get white kids to leave their possibly integrated schools to go to all-white private schools, while also taking all the money that could be spent on those public schools and taking it with those kids. And, coincidentally, slashing public school budgets, basically trying to encourage white flight, effectively making the South more tiered when it comes to education. Now, this part of the episode is going to be interesting because this is the part where I have to delve into the fact that I think I kind of have personal experiences in regards to this topic. Remember how I stated how this might have been a thing for 3 generations? Well, I am the 3rd generation. Well, look, I live in North Carolina, which is a state that has led the charge to effectively try to resegregate the South, especially in schooling. And while I am not claiming I got the worst of it, I know I did not. I know for 100% fact that I did not get the worst of it. I don't live in Charlotte. I mean, Charlotte is the one place in North Carolina that apparently has it really worse in regards to their segregated schooling. Again, urban area. Meanwhile, I live in a more suburban area, and the school that I went to was also in a heavily suburban area. Without going into too many details, the school that I went to is ranked academically lower in the state of North Carolina. And, coincidentally, it was a school in a heavily African American area. A decent plurality, almost a majority, of the population and student population were black. Combine it with the Latino population, and you get a vast supermajority. And, coincidentally, it was also considered the school with the reputation, the poor school, the school where kids did drugs, got into fights, joined gangs, had sex, etc. It was the bad school. I don't know how much of it was just the school itself thinking of itself that way, but I do know that it did kind of have a bit of a reputation, to the point where the school had a very prominent negative nickname that if you put it into a search term, you'd get some very interesting videos from the school involving one of the things that I said. And from my time in the school was basically falling apart. Halfway during my tenure at the school, it got a big redesign, but it was still basically a school that was basically falling apart. Now, at the time, I basically went, it is what it is, and kind of thought nothing of it. Yeah, this is just how all schools are, they're kind of crappy or whatever. But now that I'm older, I kind of understand the reasons why it's like, oh, I think even like kind of learning for this episode, I kind of like, a lot of this is starting to make a lot more sense now, which makes me rethink the schooling experience I had. And I think it's also just generally growing up, you kind of understand like, yeah, like when you're a teenager, you're like, ugh, this school is lame, this school sucks, ugh. But then when you get older, you realize, you know what? Actually, for what it was, for the fact that this is a school that has had its budget cut immensely by the General Assembly down here in North Carolina, yeah, they did the best they could. Now, what are some things that we could possibly do to fix the issue? Well, for starters, I think we need another Civil Rights Act, one that targets systemic/implicit racism. I don't necessarily know how we can do it, but I think it's something that should be worth considering. Sure, I think the Civil Rights Act, this new Civil Rights Act, could also tackle a lot of other issues, but this is just specifically for this issue. Now, next one, very clearly, increase public education funding. And while we're at it, maybe rework how schools get funded. The person who suggested this episode, he suggested that rather than doing it via the current system, maybe we just do a more general splitting of the funds for public schools in his community, like in the communities, rather than just doing like, oh, the property taxes pay for the schools in this area. It also might help if you are a teacher, like if you're a person who doesn't live in the area, like if you have a student that goes to a school that isn't in your area. And, just for the hell of it, ban private schools. Just ban private schools. When you capitalize schooling, when you privatize schooling, again, privatization bad, public good, nationalizing things good, publicizing things good, privatization bad. So yeah, that's pretty much all I gotta say on this episode. So thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you need some more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.